Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to just get things started. So welcome to our webinar. We have 46 attendees in the system right now, and we are expecting several more, but I want to respect your time and get started right away. So the first thing I'd like to do is to acknowledge that the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association is located in Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin-Anishinaabe Nation, and the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. To get started, I'm going to pass the system right over to Marilyn Kingdon, who is the chair of the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association. Marilyn, I'll pass it over to you to say hi to everybody. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. As Lee mentioned, I am Marilyn Kingdon, and I am the chair of the CHHA National Board of Directors and also CHHA's National President. And on behalf of the CHHA National Board members, I extend a warm welcome to all of you for joining us here today on a very important day for those of us with hearing loss and those without, even World Hearing Day. I would like to extend a big thank you to today's guest speakers. We have Dr. Marshall Chasin, Ann Griffin, and John Hollands. I'm really looking forward to their presentations today. This year's theme for World Hearing Day is to hear for life and listen with care. World Hearing Day is an annual global advocacy event to raise awareness regarding hearing loss, promote ear and hearing care, and a call for action to address hearing loss and related issues. At CHHA, we recognize this day and how important it is to protect your hearing. We also want to ensure Canadians are aware of the valuable resources available for hearing loss and hearing healthcare services and programs available through our CHHA National Office and all our CHHA networks across the country. On a personal note, I grew up in a farming community where it was not recognized how important it was and still is to protect your hearing. Many rural members are candidates for hearing loss because of the lack of use of hearing protection around loud machinery. So it's very important that we recognize that we need to look after our hearing. Thank you to everyone for being supportive to CHHA over the years as we raise awareness and advocate for all Canadians with hearing loss. So let's get started. A warm welcome to CHHA National's Executive Director, Lee Peugeot, who's our moderator for CHHA National's World Hearing Day webinar. Enjoy the session. Thank you, and over to you, Lee.
Thank you again, Marilyn. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in different time zones. I understand that we have people across the globe, but this is really a great World Hearing Day webinar from Venezuela to India, from Grand Falls to Vancouver. Got quite a few individuals on board, so we really appreciate it. As Marilyn mentioned, this year's theme for World Hearing Day is to hear for life, listen with care. And I think that anybody who has teenagers or themselves with hearing aids, if you have cochlear implants, if you just have tinnitus, or if you don't have hearing loss, but you can see the signs in other people, you are going to be interested in preventing further hearing loss or any hearing loss whatsoever. I know that I've spent more time with headphones on the side of my head in the last 2 years on constant hearing. I always wear my hearing protection, whether it's the big earmuffs or the little orange things, which I hope, John, you'll talk a little bit about this afternoon, which are best. So we're going to learn a little bit about the latest developments concerning safety standards, practices, and share specific strategies to protect your hearing and to understand best how it's going to affect your health. It's vital for us here at the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association to continue to provide the resources for Canadians around the various noises in everyday life that are going to impact your hearing. So we're going to learn from our panel of experts, and they're going to provide us with some great information. So just to let you know, there will be an opportunity to answer your questions after each guest speaker has finished their presentation. Please use the Q&A functionality rather than the chat. The chat, sometimes when it pops up, covers the captioning, and that can interfere with the ability for everybody to enjoy the webinar today. So if I can ask you to not use the chat, we would appreciate that, and use the Q&A function. And what will happen is that will be fed through to me, and I'll be able to ask the questions to our panelists. We do have live captioning available, and hopefully you can use it. For the most part, you either go to the top or the bottom, and there's 3 dots that will appear, and you click on those 3 dots and it will say live transcript, and you click on those and they will normally appear at the bottom of your page. If you are having difficulty, please email info@chha.ca. We are monitoring those emails in the background, and someone can assist you at this time. So I want to start by introducing Marshall Chasin. Marshall, give everybody a wave, please, so they know which one of you are. There you are. Great, thanks. So Dr. Chasin is the Director of Audiology and Research at the Musicians Clinics of Canada. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto in linguistics and associate professor at the School of Communication Disorders and Sciences at Western University. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Math and Linguistics from U of T and a Bachelor of Science in Audiology from B.Sc, and his Doctor of Audiology from the Arizona School of Health Sciences. So a whole bunch of different temperatures there. He's authored over 200 articles and 8 books, including the most recently published title called Music and Hearing Aids. And he writes a monthly column for the Hearing Review called Back to Basics. He won the 2012 Queen Elizabeth II Silver Jubilee Medal, the 2013 Josh Miller Shield Award, and the 2017 Canada 150 Medal. He's developed a TTS app called Temporary Hearing Test App, which is a wonderful tool. So welcome, Dr. Chasin.
Well, thank you very much, Lee, and also Marilyn, for this nice introduction to and organizing this wonderful session. I was grasping at straws as to what to call this introductory session or a few minutes, and I've decided to say, is 92 decibels damaging? I get that a lot from my clients. They come in and they have a question, or they email me, is 92 decibels damaging? They might be interested because they have an app on their phone that measures sound level. They may have heard it at different other places. So we're going to kind of dance around that question I get from many of our clients and patients. There are many standards around the world, and I won't dwell on them because that's John's bailiwick. But even in Canada, at the provincial level, there are different standards. Quebec has different standards than Ontario. But we find, or we know, that anything over 85 decibels, over time, if you listen to it for 40 hours a week, will have a long-term, permanent, measurable effect. And over the years, that gets worse and worse, or one's hearing can get worse and worse. But the most interesting thing about 85 decibels is that it's not particularly loud. A dial tone on a telephone is 85 decibels. Nobody in their right mind would consider a dial tone to be all that loud. So here we have an inherent mismatch with hearing loss prevention between what we intuitively think about something and what actually can happen. So we can be exposed to a comfortable, maybe slightly loud sound. And if we listen to it long enough, there will be a measurable hearing loss. And similarly, we can listen to a very, very loud, almost painful sound, but as long as we only listen for maybe a minute or two here and there, a gun blast, for example, or a drum snare hit, it won't have any damage at all. There are essentially 5 things we know about hearing loss from loud music or loud noise, and in the environment, that is. The first thing is that unless the sound level is 85 decibels, and we listen to it for 40 hours a week, there's no hearing damage. Now, there might be some non-auditory effects. There are many complaints from Ottawa with the loud horns of truckers. And if it was close to school, we do know that lower levels in decibel levels than 85 decibels can cause stress. It can have sleep disruption. It can interfere with learning if it's near a school for a long period of time. But these are non-auditory, temporary, transient sort of effects. We won't be able to measure that in any hearing loss, even after a year or two of being exposed to 80 or 75 or 70 decibels. Decibels, since I'm the first speaker, I guess it falls on me just to make sure that we all know. Alexander Graham Bell's father, Melville Bell, was the first to come up with the word bell, B-E-L. And it was pretty big. So a change from one bell to another bell was a large spacing. So somewhere along the line, they said, well, why don't we chop that into 10 equal parts? And that's where the word decibel comes from. Usually it's written with a small d as in David and a big B as in Bell, meaning 1/10 of a bell. So a decibel is the unit that we measure. And as you can well imagine, there are different flavors of decibels. We can have the peak decibel. The Globe and Mail had an article just the other day about the noise the truckers in Ottawa are allowed motorcycles, and they quoted levels of 120 decibels. Well, these are the peak decibels. And actually, even though that sounds great from a media point of view or in a news article, peak doesn't really affect our auditory system. Yes, a motorcycle can generate 120 decibels of peak level, but it usually hovers around maybe about 85 or 90, still over 85, but certainly not 120. So when I say it hovers around 85 or 90, I'm referring to what we call the average, or how we hear it. Usually there's the letter A, the first letter of the alphabet, appended after the end of the word decibel. So you might hear, and John might speak about 90 decibels A-weighted, meaning how it actually affects us. There are some scales out there, not very good scales, about annoyance and how a truck going by our house or something in the lower level can be annoying to you. And actually they use units like noise, N-O-Y-S-E. It's just a funny name, but it's nothing objective. It's a very subjective thing. Now, there's the second thing, other than a decibel, is that there is a relationship between how loud something is in decibels, A-weighted, and how long you're exposed to. So when I go to a rock concert on Friday night, or let's say I mow my lawn on Saturday afternoon, which I won't, by the way, I pay someone to do it. I'm doing it for maybe an hour or two here, an hour or two there. So there's nothing wrong with going to a rock concert at 100 decibels, as long as I'm not exposed for about more than an hour or two. And maybe if it is on the high side or very loud, or maybe the concert was a little bit longer, maybe I shouldn't mow my lawn on Saturday afternoon, get someone else to do it for you. So there is that relationship, and it goes like this, and this is great at parties if you can memorize this. 85 decibels for 40 hours a week is the very, very same damage as 88 decibels for only 20 hours a week. 91 decibels, another 3 decibels up for only 10 hours a week. 94 decibels for only 5 hours a week. So you can be exposed to 100 decibels, but as long as it's not more than an hour or two here and there, that's fine. Now, nobody in their right mind will actually be able to memorize that. You can, and trust me, it's great at parties. But we're actually talking about the dose. So that 85 decibels for 40 hours a week, that's 100% dose of your weekly dose of noise exposure. So think of it as an X-ray technician. After a certain level, their badge turns black and they have to take a forced vacation away from X-rays. Well, noise exposure, or equivalently, music exposure, is very similar to that. It's the dose. Yes, 85 decibels for 40 hours a week is your dose, 100% dose, but so is 100 decibels for maybe only an hour or two a week. That's also 100%. So we're not really concerned about, is 92 decibels damaging? Well, maybe if you listen to it long enough, or maybe it's not if you don't listen to it long enough. So I have to be wishy-washy. There's an article that I sent to the website. It's on the CHHA website. I wrote about this, called Measuring the Peak Noise Exposure While Trying to Outrun the Cops. It's a humorous, fun article. It talks about the difference between average versus peaks. excuse me. So actually, we're interested in dose. Now, believe it or not, there are dose meters, and those are more important than sound level meters. Sound level will give you 96, 92 decibels. Is that damaging? I don't know. But dose gives you what percentage you've been exposed throughout the week. There are some dose meters available on your phone, but only if you have an iPhone. If you have an Android, there are no valid dose measurements that you can get. Android has something that turns down the volume of things. We call it compression, and it alters the numbers that you get from Android phones. But if you have an iPhone or know somebody with an iPhone, make friends with someone with an iPhone, there are two free dosimeters. One is called Sound Log, SOUNDLOG, Sound Log, and it'll give, and you hold it up to the music, the noise, the whatever you're exposed to over a period of time, and it will give you a reading. You can be exposed to this level for 12 minutes, let's say, and it will actually do these calculations for you. Another one is out of a company, an organization in the United States called NIOSH, NIOSH. If you Google that and you type in dosimeter or dose meter, you'll be able to download a free dose meter for the iPhone. And so these are very, very useful. And the last thing that I want to say is that the big question I'm frequently asked, in addition to is 92 decibels too loud, is should I buy an MP3 player for my son or grandson or granddaughter, whatever, for Christmas time or whatever. This is usually by the parents, the grandparents. And the answer is yes, enjoy it thoroughly. But there is something called the 80-90 rule. 80% volume for 90 minutes a day. There's the decibel level. 80 is around, it depends on the sound level meter. It depends on the MP3 player. It could be 90, it could be 93 or whatever. But if you have the 80-90 rule, 80% volume for 90 minutes a day, that will give you pretty well 1/2 of your daily dose of noise exposure. And so that's a good rule of thumb. So if your favorite song comes on, turn up the volume, enjoy it thoroughly, just turn it down to 80% or less. If you're listening for more than an hour and a half a day, 90 minutes a day, you're being antisocial and maybe you might not want to do that. So it's not the sound level in decibels, but it's the sound level and how long you're exposed to, summarized under that dose heading. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marshall. Really appreciate the information, especially around the headphones and the information. We did have someone ask a question that said they've noticed that some people are really able to tolerate louder noises, and others seem to not be very tolerant of those loud noises. Is that something that is a physical thing in the ear, or is that more of a psychological effect?
That's a very important and very good question. It's mostly a psychological effect. There are some people that are more susceptible to hearing loss, and that's true of music as well as industrial noise. And in fact, in a lot of the standards, John, I'm sure will allude to this, but they have an appendix about people that are more susceptible. We see this all the time. We go to industry, two people working 25 years in an assembly line, same noise exposure. One person has a very significant noise-induced hearing loss, and the person right next to them has almost no hearing loss. So that's susceptibility. But some people don't like loud noises, regardless of its effect on their hearing, and that's more of a psychological issue. We're not sure why some people are more susceptible. We think it's genetic, but that kind of just puts one question back farther, so we don't really know.
Okay, great. The other question that I had is was having a discussion with some friends a couple of nights ago. We were talking about this webinar, and the two of them got into a bit of a debate about what's worse for your hearing, a drum solo or a guitar solo. So the loud boom, 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 or the screeching, so what's worse?
Neither. If you don't listen to it long enough, drum solos and guitar solos can be great, and you should go ahead and listen to them to the extent that you want. Just don't mow your lawn the next day. Give your ears a bit of a rest. In well-controlled laboratory studies, bass notes are slightly more damaging than treble notes. But in reality, with the complex nature of noise and music, not much of a difference across the frequency range. So that a piccolo and a bass would be equally damaging depending on the factors such as how long you listen to it and the decibel levels A-weighted or their average decibel level.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate that. We do have a couple of other questions in the chat, but I'm going to save those till the end because there's some they're general questions and may be better answered for by Ann in a minute. So that's what I'm going to be doing with that. So want to say thank you to Ann for coming on board. Ann Griffin is a clinical audiologist who works with the research team at Memorial University. And she discovers genes causing hearing loss to achieve a better understanding of the mechanisms involved in hearing well. And also talking a little bit about the vulnerabilities of the human hearing system. This work has real potential to inform strategies for treatment and prevention of hearing loss in the future. And Ann is committed to promoting awareness of hearing health across Canada and also about hearing protection, and to provide strategies to improve accessibility for people with hearing loss, which is very important to us here at the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association. Ann is a lifetime member of the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association and one of our past award winners, the Winifred C. Corey Award. So Ann, I'm going to turn the whole thing right over to you.
Thank you, Lee. That's a lovely introduction. It is really great to be here participating with all of you at CHHA in this webinar to acknowledge and align ourselves and celebrate World Hearing Day. So I am delighted to be joining Marshall and John to provide some insight about protecting our hearing, about being healthy in our hearing. And I have some comments to make that sort of add to our primary discussion of what we can do about noise today. So first of all, I wanted to kind of consider it from the point of view of what can each of us do to protect our own hearing health. You know, hearing and health are very closely intertwined, and we have a situation where hearing loss can cause health problems, and then conversely, health problems can cause hearing loss. And I don't know if any of you have really thought about it quite like that before. Rather than speak about the effects of hearing loss at this point, I want to focus on the health problems that can cause hearing loss. So some of these are out of our control, at least at the current state of research and development. Genetic hearing loss has been referred to, and it certainly is a common cause of hearing loss. There are also genetic conditions that put hearing at risk, even if they don't directly attack hearing. So for example, something like inherited diabetes, which may be more difficult to manage than acquired diabetes, can definitely increase your risk of hearing loss. And we'll speak more about that in a moment. Another thing, though, that is difficult to do anything about is a sudden, unexpected traumatic injury to brain or ears. Illnesses that cause stress on hearing. And in fact, there has been reports of COVID causing at least temporary tinnitus and hearing loss. Though it's better known for breathing difficulty, that is also something that would suggest that we should be proactive to checking our hearing if we've had a bad bout of COVID or other diseases. We also sometimes are in the unenviable position of needing to take severe drug treatment, say, for example, for cancer. Some of the chemotherapies can be damaging to hearing as well. And there may not be any choice about that, but it's certainly an issue where we would want to proactively monitor hearing if undergoing treatment through some of those kinds of drugs. Hearing loss, of course, from aging of our bodies also comes about. Interesting, some people are less susceptible to that. We have older people which have what we call golden ears, and for some mysterious reason that our team is hoping to learn more about, they don't suffer the same damaging effects of age. So that's an area for exploration in the future to see if it would inform any other kinds of solutions for and new treatments for hearing loss. So what can we control to support our own healthy hearing? Today, we're talking quite a bit about exposure to noise, and that is certainly extremely important. One of the things that when we had Marshall talking about standards for noise exposure, one thing that we do need to remember is that increased susceptibility that some people have. And Marshall's right in saying genetic susceptibility may make us more vulnerable to damage from noise than the average person. So this is something where if there is hearing loss in the family, it's a good thing to become aware of what kind of hearing loss is occurring in the family and whether that might put you at higher risk for damage from noise if you are working in an industrial setting, for example. Now, there are other health issues that you may be less familiar with that can have an impact on hearing. And I just want to put this in terms of some proactive things that each of us can do. So the first thing is to be very proactive about your heart health. I don't know if anyone realizes that heart disease can put stress on your hearing, and that it is important to try to manage your heart health, not only for your heart health, but for your hearing health as well. Diabetes is one that a lot of people don't realize can actually make your risk of hearing loss twice as high. So one of the things about diabetes, I have had a recent diagnosis of diabetes a year ago and have consequently learned a lot about it. And one thing I've learned is it's when the sugar levels spike high that we get the greatest damage to organs. And so one of the things that's very important if you do have a diagnosis of diabetes is think very hard about what kind of steps you can do to keep your sugar in the reasonable range, either by diet and exercise alone or with the help of medication. But do be aware that it's not simply about, say, your eyes, your sensation. Hearing is another organ that can be damaged by diabetes. Sleep apnea is something that also can cause trouble. And of course, when you think about the problem of sleep apnea, which is not being able to breathe properly while you're sleeping, there may be two reasons that can be harmful to hearing. So one thing would be that you, of course, are snoring and you might be exposed to the very loud sounds of your own snoring or someone else in the same bed as you. That can be a tremendous risk if it goes on day after day. And if you're getting quite a few hours of exposure of high levels, snoring can definitely exceed 90 decibels. So it's something to watch out for. And then in addition to that, if you're the person with sleep apnea, there is a suggestion that decreased blood supply to the inner ear can cause some long-term damage there. So important to address proactively any issues you're having with sleep or a partner is having with sleep. Iron deficiency is another thing that people possibly don't realize, particularly when it's severe enough to be iron deficient anemia, then that can double your risk of hearing loss as well. Mumps is another health condition. And of course, we mainly think of getting mumps in childhood. And of course, we're lucky enough to have great vaccination for mumps, but it's just to underscore the importance of that. It's a rare thing to hear about mumps causing hearing loss, but it can occur. And this would be because of the swelling that mumps causes that can sometimes inflame tissues around the brain and the ear. Though that is rare, it's certainly not something you want to encounter if it's possible to avoid it. Chronic stress also, we know that stress has many effects. It can cause a lot of trouble, a lot of multiple health problems, but that includes hearing loss. Again, we don't always hear about that. Most likely from poorer circulation that results from chronic stress and reduced oxygen supply to the inner ear. So those are some direct health things. And then there's a few things that have to do with our lifestyle. So one thing that people might not realize is that alcohol in excessive amounts above recommended levels can not only contribute to heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, but also hearing loss. And it can damage your central auditory cortex, which can slow down our processing. So even if you're still hearing, it may take longer for your brain to make sense of what you're hearing. Smoking and vaping can both be harmful to hearing. So that's important to look into and to consider what choices. And even vaping without nicotine, there are substances that create flavors that can cause some long-term damage to hearing. Viagra is one that I don't know that a lot of people realize has a risk of hearing loss as well. So Viagra can double your risk of hearing loss and also can create instances where your hearing drops suddenly in one or both ears. So those are things to be, concerned about and to consider the choices that we make when it comes to noise, when it comes to management of health, when it comes to lifestyle. And I think the take-home message here is we need to value our hearing as we value our health. They are intertwined and have effects on each other that we haven't even begun to fully understand. So it's an encouragement to think not only about how we can listen safely, but also how we can just live in a way that supports hearing health. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot. I didn't even know, the snoring and Viagra, you're not even safe in bed from hearing loss. So that's something to think about. I do have a couple of questions that were put up in the Q&A, and one is one that we get a lot at the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association is, can hearing loss be reversed? And how do you get help from an audiologist or an ear, nose, and throat doctor? How do those going to an audiologist, because we encourage people to do that, how does that help with your hearing loss?
Well, taking question one first about reversal of hearing loss, there are certainly temporary kinds of hearing loss. And one problem sometimes has been that people perhaps have felt that something would be temporary and haven't gone for help, and only to find out that some permanent damage has occurred that might have been reversed with the right treatment. And that's heartbreaking. I mentioned sudden hearing loss a minute ago. We always want to make sure that people, if you have an extreme loss of hearing in one ear or both overnight, do not delay. Go immediately to see your health professional. There are standards for how to treat cases of sudden hearing loss. Unfortunately, there are cases where it isn't reversible, but you don't even have a chance to try to reverse it if you don't get the right treatment. So very proactive management, paying attention to what you're hearing is important. Other things too, a bad cold, an infection, sinus trouble, as I mentioned, COVID, some of those kinds of illnesses definitely can give us a lot of stress and temporary change in our hearing. And people may come in and say, I'm deaf completely, just because it's so disturbing not to hear as well as you did yesterday, or, you normally hear. It's kind of hard to gauge how much hearing is gone. So leading to your next question, it's extremely important to try to get an assessment, to get the information, not simply to have someone sort of look in your ear and wonder if it might be this or it might be that, but to get your hearing measured. And I would definitely, if you have a sudden change of hearing or something that's even a gradual change, anything like that, I think, take it into your own hands and go and visit an audiologist to get a thorough assessment, and not only the test, but a thorough explanation of what's going on. You can't sort of play a role in protecting your own hearing unless you actually get information to proceed on. So that's very important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message, is you won't know until you get an expert to tell you what's happening and whether it is something that's permanent or not. It's best to know right away or get it treated so it can go away. So thank you, Ann. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And one more point about that is, when I talk about learning the information, I don't just mean a sentence that says, oh, you need hearing aids, or oh, you don't. I really mean an understanding of what do I see going on with your hearing? Maybe it's changed, like some exploration, things to watch out for, an idea of how often to go back and be monitored. Those are important things to know. And it's us, the consumers, that can ask for that information and to make sure that we are the owners of that information to act upon it accordingly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ann. Now, we do have a couple more questions, but I'm going to go on to John Hollands, and then we'll bring all the panelists back because some of the questions that are being asked are good for all of our panelists. So right now, I would like to introduce John Hollands. John is the principal of John Hollands Safety Associates, and he's got 30 years of experience working as a safety, health, and environment professional. He's held previous senior roles with HP, AstraZeneca, Apotex, and University of Toronto, specializing in emergency and crisis, including pandemic planning, occupational health and safety management systems, and occupational hygiene. He's also served as a reviewer for the U.S. National Safety Council's prestigious International R.W. Campbell Award. He's done a lot of research in pharmacology and crop diseases and has served as a part-time professor of pharmaceutical sciences and safety at Seneca, York. He's a passionate volunteer with Habitat for Humanity and is the chair of the Risk and Assessment Committee and member of the Audit and HR committees for the National Board of Directors. And I want to welcome John, and we're going to share the screen. We're going to change things up a little bit, and I will be sharing the screen because John has a bit of a presentation, and we'll be doing that right now. So John, welcome, and thank you for being a part of what we're doing here.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Lee. As Ann mentioned, some forms of hearing loss are hereditary, and we can't do much about that. But noise-induced hearing loss is preventable, and that's why the government stepped in when they came out with the Health and Safety Act and put some rules together as far as how that hazard should be managed. Simply put, it's caused by overexposure or overdose, as Marshall mentioned, to loud sounds. In some cases, the damage is only temporary, which is really a warning we should all pay heed to. But repeated exposure to excessive noise for long periods of time can cause permanent damage. And unfortunately, the human ear starts to accept that change and doesn't really necessarily notice it on a day-to-day basis after some of that damage has happened. So how much sound is safe? Well, it depends on how long and how loud. As Marshall mentioned, audiologists measure the level of different sounds with a unit called the A-weighted decibel or dBA, and that's used in the law. So the good news is that noise is measurable. Sounds with levels below the 70 dBA level pose no known risk of hearing loss, no matter how long you listen. This is roughly what you would hear if you were driving alone at highway speeds in a family car with the windows up and the radio off. So when sound levels increase, exposure time becomes an important risk factor for hearing loss. In general, the louder the sound, the less time it takes to pose risks to your hearing. There can be hazardous noise in the workplace where we spend up to a third of our lives. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety states that noise is one of the most common occupational health hazards. Noise-induced hearing loss is an occupational disease recognized in the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act and most other workplace insurance schemes. People sometimes cannot continue the work that they've been doing for many years after significant hearing loss. On the other hand, nuisance noise is usually controlled by municipal bylaws. That's a whole other issue. And this loud neighbor's noise may not harm your hearing, but it might harm your mental health. Next slide, please. Workplace noise is regulated under 3 occupational health and safety regulated topics: noise limits, noise and hearing assessments, and noise controls. This is typical health and safety. So what about workplace safe noise limits? In Ontario and most other jurisdictions, the Occupational Health and Safety Act Noise Regulation 351, in our case, sets the safe limit of exposure to that 85 decibel number, averaged over 8 hours. So a typical work day is how the legislation looks at it. Warning signs are required in an area where noise levels regularly exceed 85 decibels. So if you are to go into a factory or a farm processing plant or any kind of large facility with machines, you may want to look out for those signs. It's also used, the 85 decibel A-weighted average, as the action limit. That's an important term by all other Canadian provinces and territories, and the US NIOSH, which is a bit of an expert group. Interestingly, except for Quebec and the US national OSHA regulations. And they still use 90 decibels, which Ontario had until probably about 10, 12 years ago. And federally regulated workplaces. So federally regulated include airports and railroads, anything that crosses provincial borders. And they use 87 decibels. The regulations also include reference to the maximum peak pressure level. And in most cases, it's 140 decibels A-weighted. And it's prescribed by all provinces except Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and PEI, and the federally regulated workplaces. Now, interestingly about the car, we all feel it's a safe place to be in most cases, but the noise level inside the car increases significantly when you open the windows. It can exceed 85 decibels, and then turning the music up so you can hear it over the wind raises the noise levels even more. And we accommodate to that. Loud noise above 120 decibels may cause immediately harm to your ears. But as we've heard, we are all a little bit different. Slide 4. Remember that noise exposure increases logarithmically due to the Bell family with the sound pressure, so that the permissible exposure time is halved for usually every 3 decibel increase or doubling in noise levels. This is called the exchange rate, the amount by which the permitted sound level may increase if the exposure time is halved. And it's used by all provinces except Quebec that uses 5 decibel exchange rate. As we'll see later, this is important when selecting adequate hearing protection, since higher exchange rates result in higher allowable noise levels. On this slide, we can see how the maximum permitted daily duration changes with the allowable level. And this is a good way to see how the logarithmic scale applies in this case. So the take home is every 3 decibels of change in sound is a doubling if we increase that decibel level. On slide 6, we see that workplace noise measurement is done using noise exposure surveys. And this is required by occupational health and safety regulations if hazardous noise is suspected. The CSA standard ZEN 107-56-94 is the main standard used in Canada and requires the use of a calibrated integrated sound level meter for both the person and the general area. I remember doing many noise surveys in various plants, and sometimes I would walk into a cone of silence, as I called it, where the reflecting, overlapping sound waves would cancel each other out. And in the middle of this noisy factory, I would walk within a 6-foot circle, if you will, where I detected hardly any noise at all. So noise is an interesting and complex phenomenon. Now, as far as rules of thumb, according to the Centers for Disease Control, a whisper is about 30 decibels, a normal conversation level, about 60, inside the car or aircraft in flight, as I mentioned, is 70, a motorcycle engine, 90 to 95, and a gunshot blast is typically 140 decibels. The one that I like to remember is that if you need to shout to be heard, the surrounding noise level may be harmful. And that's really if you're talking with someone at arm's length. And that brings up another interesting idea. Noise levels are also changed with distance from the source. So in a free field, as it's called, if you can imagine yourself in the middle of a field, free from other sound sources or reflections, the sound pressure level decreases by 6 decibels with the doubling of the distance. Again, this is a physical thing, so we can quite easily measure it. Staying a distance from the source at concerts and parties will reduce your noise exposure. Another example, if you're on a long flight, there was an Airbus A321 study that showed that noise levels are higher in the rear of the cabin near and behind the engine propellers, which is sort of intuitive, and near windows. So when you have a choice, moving to other locations in the cabin can reduce your noise levels. And I think that example is useful in many parts of our lives. And once we start to become aware of these relationships, we can choose safer places and safer habits. Now, slide 8 talks about the traditional hierarchy of controls, which is kind of the nuts and bolts of health and safety. To control this physical hazard, our first choice is an engineering control. In this case, we try to eliminate the source, substitute that source for one of a lesser hazard, i.e. less noisy. We enclose that noisy source, or we install absorption and acoustic devices to absorb it and reduce that noise level. In some cases, alterations to the workplace environment can be effective, such as the use of acoustically absorptive tiles, panels, and noise barriers. And Marshall, you're probably quite familiar with that in the sound setting, especially studios, etc. Our last choice, because it does take the engagement of the person who's being affected, is called personal protection. And when these engineering modifications cannot adequately control the noise excess, properly selected hearing protection, such as earmuffs and or plugs, which is what we'll talk about in the next few slides, and training, because you have to know how to put them in properly and how to take care of them. These are usually earmuffs and earplugs, and they're selected based on their noise reduction rating, or NRR, as it's called. The sound reduction at the inner ear is in decibels, based on that NRR, or that theoretical NRR, as I call it, because there's some issues with that. So a common question is how to select the right hearing protector to reduce noise to a safe level. So let's use an example. The energy from a chainsaw typically registers around 110, 120 decibels. That can theoretically be reduced to 80 decibels at the inner ear, wearing an NRR rated at 30 decibels. So from 110 down to 80, which we would consider safe, a drop of 30. But as the CSA standard and other research indicates, only about 50% of the NRR is typically achieved with earplugs for various reasons. Again, we're human, we're different, we have different behaviors. So the math is pretty simple. 110 to minus 30 decibels divided by 2 for that 50% safety factor results in a level of 95, which we really don't consider safe for any long periods of exposure. So we can only expect the noise reduction down to that 95. However, about 75% of the NRR is achieved by wearing earmuffs, the other choice we have for personal hearing protectors. So in this case, 110 decibels unprotected minus the 22 decibels of protection leaves us with 88 decibels. Much better, not quite the 85 we're targeting for, but again, we can adjust our time exposure for that. A tip I'd like to leave with everyone is convenience. We all know how we're drawn to convenience. And so if you identify tools for things that you do in the house or in your life, leave a set of earmuffs or earplugs in that area. For example, on the lawnmower, on the weed trimmer, these days, snow blowers, chainsaws, any kind of power tool, if used, especially if used indoors in a small room because of that reflection. If they're easily available, you're more likely to use them. So another common question about these hearing protective devices, what are the advantages and limitations of earplugs versus earmuffs? Well, some of them are quite obvious. Earplugs are smaller, they can be mass produced or individually molded to fit the ear. And I'm not sure if everyone can see these, but I have a set of individually molded earplugs. And if you notice, there's a small, tiny little fiber that allows a transmission of the speaking frequencies. So As far as earplugs, you can probably get the best results from a molded plug. Now, they're not cheap. I think these were about $100, but they can be reused over and over. So another positive side, they're simple to use, less expensive, and often more comfortable to wear in hot or damp work areas. Earmuffs, on the other hand, can vary with respect to the material and depth of the dome, the force of the headband, which can be uncomfortable. So the deeper and heavier the dome, the greater the low frequency attenuation provided by the protector. The headband must fit tightly enough and properly enough around the ears to maintain a proper seal, yet not be too tight so that you don't want to wear them at all. Some advantages of these earmuffs are they usually provide greater protection than the plugs, although it's not always true. They're also, for sure, easier to fit, generally more durable than plugs, and have replaceable parts. Some disadvantages of earplugs are providing less noise protection than some muffs, and they should not be used in areas exceeding 105 decibels. They're also not visible as the earmuffs are, so it's making them more difficult for supervisors to check to see if the workers are wearing them and wearing them properly. On the next slide, some disadvantages of the earmuffs are they're more expensive, often less comfortable than plugs, especially in hot work areas. In areas where noise levels are very high, muffs and plugs can be worn together, however, to give us better protection. So we can play with the two different types of personal hearing protection to come up with the protection that we need. Now, slide 12 highlights one of the key things about us being human. User preference is important, since the protection must be worn at all times to be effective. In order to get full benefit, hearing protections must be worn all the time during noisy work. If hearing protection is removed only for a short time, the protection is substantially reduced. The following table gives a maximum protection provided by non-continuous use of the ideally fitted 100% efficient hearing protector. For example, when hearing protection is rated with an attenuation of 25 decibels, if one takes off his or her hearing protector for 5 minutes in an hour, the maximum protection will be reduced to no more than 11 decibels. This was a study done by the UK Health and Safety Executive. So in that table, slide 13, we can see how quickly the protection factor decreases when we remove it for those short periods of time. And there's one more complication with any device. They need to be properly maintained, especially the earmuffs. So how should I care for them? Well, there'll be manufacturer's instructions, so don't throw them away. Check for wear and tear before you're wearing them. Replace ear cushioning or plugs that are no longer pliable. So you may have in your bathroom kit an old set of earplugs, and you may find that they're just like leather. So they're no good anymore. Replace the headbands because the pressure around those muffs is what's helping to keep the noise out. The cushions need to be pliable. Once they harden up again, they'll be less effective. And they can be washed and cleaned regularly. But just like anything else, once we introduce a device, instead of an engineering control, we have to take care of them, as we all do with our hearing and the hearing of our loved ones. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. I really appreciate that. I had the question about which was better, the earplugs or the earmuffs. But I did like the fact that you said whatever's just sitting there on the lawnmower or in my pocket, because I always carried them in my pocket in a little case, those ones. So I do appreciate that. So we do have several questions for all of our participants, and I hope that everybody can stay on for a little bit longer. But there is a few questions that I think really have come out of all of this. is there a difference between someone who has hearing loss or someone who doesn't have hearing loss in their exposure at 85 or 90 decibels? So if you already have hearing damage, do you get less damage at this, at 85 or more, or is it the same? So that's been a question a few times. So I'd like to know what that is.
Maybe if I can start. Up until 1995, we didn't know the answer to that question. That's a darn good question. It took Eric Borg and his colleagues, Barbara Canlon and Bertie Engelson, in 1995 to do what they call a meta study, where they look at a whole bunch of different studies and they try to make sure that they're sufficiently similar. And what they found in 1995 is that there's no difference. In other words, a person with a very already existing sensory neural hearing loss, like most of our listeners have today, are neither more susceptible nor less susceptible to future hearing loss from noise or music than someone that has normal hearing.
Great, thank you. I do appreciate that answer, because again, like I said, there was a lot of people who really wanted to ask that question. I know there was a little bit about what can the earmuffs be reused, and obviously you talked about maintenance, John. But is there a difference in quality? I know you can buy them at the dollar store, and I know you can buy them at a safety supply store, and the price is quite a bit different. Does that matter?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the typical rule of thumb, you get what you pay for, especially in a consolidated world like we live in. So some of these will be marked that they're approved by a certain association. So NIOSH, for example, or CSA, other organizations, Marshall or Ann, you may know what some of them are in certain locations, but look for an approval rating. That really speaks to the quality. And again, I've got muffs that I bought 10 years ago for my lawn tractor, and I just hang them up on the shifter so I don't forget them. And the same with the snowblower, and I've had those same muffs for those 10 years, and there's no sign of damage or disintegration so far. So I would suggest you buy what you can afford, and you'll probably have them for a long, long time.
Great, thank you, John. I appreciate that. And there was a question that we didn't get to during your presentation that I was asking about smoking. Does it cause hearing damage? And also, is there a risk to the baby if the mother smokes?
It's a good question. And I have to tell you that it's been sort of a personal goal to kind of capture a little bit more systematically some of these risk factors that we need to be educating people about. So I cannot say that I have the ultimate answer and have done all the deep reading on nicotine exposure per se. I know Marshall has talked about this before. I think the problem with many of these things, and noise is one, is that the damage isn't seen immediately. It is a kind of cumulative long-term damage, and that there may be some individual greater susceptibility than others. I don't know the answer about the baby, but I'm thinking that if it all has to do with reduced oxygen supply, then it would make sense that there might be potential for harm. But I don't know. Marshall, do you have a better answer to the question about nicotine exposure?
Well, smoking in large studies where you control for everything has been shown to be a risk factor, can exacerbate it, assuming you have a poor cardiovascular system. So smoking really screws with that. So it reflects how much oxygen ultimately gets to your ear. If your ear doesn't get enough air supply through the thousands and millions, I guess, of capillaries servicing the nerve endings in the ear, they are more susceptible to hearing loss. A coincidental finding in a couple of studies is that if you happen to have an excellent cardiovascular system and you smoke on occasion, it actually is protective interestingly enough. But I'm not going to suggest that anyone go out there and start to smoke. I don't know of any studies with respect to fetal hearing ability, but I think your intuition is quite right. Anything that disrupts oxygen supply in any way can not only ruin your auditory system, but affect many other systems as well.
Great. Thank you. We do have other questions, and we're going to save those and make sure that we can publish them out as part of our recap of this. But I wanted to thank you all for for your time today. It was really interesting. I learned a lot about some interesting things that cause hearing damage and how to prevent it. One of them is not to sleep next to a snorer, and but that's okay. And keep your earmuffs where they need to be. And your earplugs, and whether that you're going to a concert or mowing your lawn, and also that I should get my son to mow the lawn, but if he's not been listening to his iPod for the whole week beforehand. So thank you all for that. And again, thank you for being a part of our World Hearing Day. We do have a lot of other things that are happening. We have our CHHA Awards that are coming up. We have our scholarship application that are happening over the next little while. So please follow us on Facebook, follow us through Twitter and Instagram, and be a part of what we do. So John, Ann, and Marshall, we really appreciate everything you've done. And to our audience, thank you very much for being a great audience, asking some wonderful questions, and we'll be able to find the answers for everybody as soon as I can. And there were a few things that you mentioned, John and Marshall, about our website and some of our blogs and our resources, and some of the answers can be found there. So thank you all very much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.